Today we're making raspberry and salted caramel eclairs as seen on the Great British Bake Off Technical Challenge. Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to Black Cat Kitchen. Today we're making raspberry and salted caramel eclairs as seen on the Great British Bake Off Technical Challenge. So let's get started. These are the ingredients you'll need to make the eclairs. I've listed the amounts in the description below. I've drawn lines on my baking parchment 4 inches apart in 2 rows. This allows me to make sure my eclairs are exactly the same length. Make sure you're drawing it on the side that you're not going to pipe on. So this is the side I've drawn on, and I'm going to flip it over and I can see those lines through my paper. Into our pan, we're going to add our butter. Not all of it, you'll save that bit for your caramel later. And our water, and we want this to come up to quite a high bubble, so all of that butter gets melted before we add in our flour. Preheat your oven to 200 degrees centigrade or 400 degrees Fahrenheit. We're going to break 5 eggs into our bowl. We want to just gently whisk these up. They don't have to be fully incorporated, but we just want to break up that yolk and that white. And you may not use all the egg when you're mixing it into your batter mix. It's very dependent on temperature and weather and a bunch of different scientific things. So we're just going to break up those eggs. Just give them a little bit of a whisk. Those are the bubbles you're looking for. Let's get our flour in there. And we're going to stir that up until it forms a bit of a paste. You really have to work the flour into the wet mixture here so that it all incorporates. So you just want to keep beating that together until it really starts to come together in a little bit of a ball. And then we're going to transfer it to a bowl to cool slightly. Let's get that into our bowl. Ding! Just to help that cool a little bit quicker, we're going to just spread it up the sides a little bit, thin it out, and give it more surface area. And that will allow it to cool just that little bit quicker. So leave that just to cool for about 5 minutes, and then we'll get our eggs in. Let's get our piping bag ready. So I've got these large piping bags, and I find that they work best when you're working with this amount of batter. But you can use a smaller one, or you can use a plastic kitchen bag. I'm using this star tip here in order to give the eclairs little ridges on the top. That will allow for the icing to adhere, and it gives it a nice texture in your mouth. If you haven't got a tip like this and you're just going to cut the end of the bag, you can use a fork and run it over your eclair. So let's get that in the bag and get the tip snipped off. Just make sure that's nice and snug in there. You don't want it moving around when you're piping. So we're going to add our eggs in about 1 at a time, and you'll want to stir it quite quickly once you've added them in. Like I said, you may not use all of the egg in this, but it's really important to make sure you incorporate each bit of egg each time before adding the next amount. And I know it seems like it's not going to come together, but it will. Just keep mixing. You can see all of that first addition has been incorporated, so let's add some more. This does make a lot of dough, but don't worry, it freezes really beautifully and they defrost in no time, so you can quickly stuff them with ice cream for a nice simple dessert. We're ready for that next addition. I know it seems like it's taking a while, but like I said, it does make quite a bit. This is the consistency you're looking for. So when you lift your spoon up, it sort of falls off in a bit of a V pattern. You can see there, just like that. Let's get the mix into our piping bag. If you've never piped before, this is really easy. I like to fold the bag over my hand so that I've got full control, and then just use a spoonula like this, or a wooden spoon or another spatula. Just press it along the side of the bag. You'll force it down afterwards to get to that tip. I don't want to overfill my bag because it can be a little bit difficult to work with, so I'm leaving some of the batter in the bowl. And I'm just going to pull up the ends and get that little bit of air out. Just working down the dough that you've got. Any air pockets, just kind of roll them out a little bit. Twist the end, and there's your dough ready to go. Anytime you're piping onto parchment paper, you're going to want to stick it down. So I just take a little bit of dough and pop it in each corner, and then just use that to tack my paper down. And you can see we've got all of those nice lines in there, so it's nice and easy to see where we'll be piping. So I'm piping them staggered so that they've got room to grow. And when I'm piping, I like to squeeze with my dominant hand, that's my right hand, and direct with my other hand because it gives it a more even pressure. I'm going to quickly pipe my other sheet and then I'll show you how to clean up those little edges. So you're just going to dip your finger in a little bit of water and just press down any of those little peaks. You don't want them to burn in the oven. And when the oven is as hot as it is, they can burn quite quickly. You're just going to want to sprinkle a little bit of water, not on, but around the choux pastry. This allows for steam in the oven. It really helps them sort of rise up in there. Into the oven we go. These bake at 2 different temperatures. We're going to start them at 200 degrees centigrade or 400 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 minutes. And then without opening the oven door, we're turning them down to 170 or 325. To make our caramel dipped hazelnuts, we're going to spike our hazelnut with a toothpick and just set them aside, and then we'll make our caramel. We're going to put our sugar in our pot and turn it on to medium-high. You're going to want to start stirring this with either a wooden spoon or a rubber spatula that's heat-proof. Otherwise, if you use metal in here, it will crystallize the sugar and your caramel will be ruined. You can see you'll get these big sugary lumps. That's just all of the sugar coming together from the heat. Don't worry, they will start to melt out. Just keep stirring. You want this to come to a deep amber color, so we're nearly here with this one. We're going to put a little bit aside in a bowl to dip our hazelnuts, and then we'll add our cream, our butter, and our salt to make this our salted caramel. Into our pot, we're going to slowly stream our cream. It will bubble up, don't worry. Just stand back, it does get quite steamy, and you'll want to turn the heat off at this point. To this, we're going to add in our butter and get that melted in. We're adding in some flaky salt. We're going to set this aside to cool and we're going to dip our hazelnuts. I've set up a towel on the floor and I'm dipping my hazelnuts in that caramelized sugar. It's caramelizing and it's hardening quite quickly now, so you do want to work really fast. So what you'll do is you'll take your hazelnut that's on your toothpick, dip it in the sugar, let most of that sugar just pour off until you can see it start to get hard, and then you're just going to snip it and pop it under a cutting board or a cookbook. And then you can cut your strands down to as short or as long as you'd like. Look how thick that syrup is now. If your caramel starts to get too hard, put it in the microwave just for a few seconds to warm it up so you can finish your hazelnuts. Let's get started on our Creme Patissiere. We're going to start by heating up our milk. We're going to turn the heat to medium, and we want the milk to get nice and hot, but not boiling or it will scald. Now into our bowl, we're going to add our eggs. Here we're going to use 2 whole eggs and 2 egg yolks. And you can save those egg whites for macarons or a meringue, whatever you'd like. Just break those up. And then we're going to add our sugar and cornstarch to this mix. In goes our vanilla. And we're going to whisk that until the eggs get lighter in color. Now that our milk is pretty hot and all of our sugar is dissolved in our egg mixture, we're going to slowly add some of that milk. Just a little bit, and we're going to stir that in. Really whisk it up. You don't want scrambled eggs. And once that first lot is in, you can add the rest of the milk. And we're going to put that back on the heat to cook out the corn flour. You want to make sure that you're stirring this constantly. It will thicken up pretty quickly, and you don't want it to burn to the bottom of your pot. When you see those plops, that's how you know it's ready. It's always best to strain your creme pat, just in case you missed any bits that were in the bottom. You definitely won't get a handshake if you have a lumpy creme pat.
Oh, really? The thing is...
Just work it through your sieve. This is a very fine sieve, so it's taking a little while longer than usual. And then we're going to separate it and flavor it. So we're going to split this in half. So into our first bowl, we're going to add a few tablespoons of raspberry jam. I'm just going to whisk that in. And I like to do this while the creme pat is still hot because it helps to really melt that jam in there. I've used a seedless jam so that you don't get any bits in. And another thing I like to add, because I really love raspberry flavor, raspberry powder. So it's raspberry dust. It's basically freeze-dried raspberry. If you can't find this, it's perfectly fine, but it really does add a little bit to the color and the flavor. We're going to cover our creme pat in cling film. You want to make sure that you press the cling film right onto the skin, or onto the top rather, because you don't want to form a skin. And we're going to set this in the fridge to cool. Now we're going to take a few spoonfuls of our salted caramel sauce that we made earlier. Looks amazing. You can make this creme pat a day in advance. It will store probably 2 days in the fridge before you need to use it, but you do want to make sure it's completely cooled before you use it. That looks gorgeous. We're going to cover that one up and pop it in the fridge as well. I've set some raspberries aside to decorate the eclairs, but I'm going to press these raspberries through a sieve to try and get as much of their juice out as possible. This will act as the liquid in our icing. Now, usually you would use a fondant icing sugar, which will set up like a fondant fancy icing. If you can't get that, and I couldn't, this is an easy way to make it. So you just add some golden syrup to your liquid. I've got 750 grams of sugar here, but I'm only going to use half because the other half are going to be for the caramel ones. You want to give that a good mix until all of the icing sugar is completely absorbed and there are no lumps left. Now that all that sugar's been absorbed, it's a nice thick consistency. Now on to our salted caramel topping. We're going to add in the other tablespoon of our golden syrup and some water. Just enough to give it the texture consistency you want, so you may need to add a little bit more afterwards, but we're going to start with a couple of tablespoons. And let's get that stirred together. Now that's a beautiful consistency. I'm going to pop a few holes in the bottom of each eclair so that I can easily get that piping bag in there. And I'm just going to poke my tip of my icing bag in there and give it a squeeze on either side. Not too much, just enough that you start to see the eclair plump up a little bit. And that is your filled eclair. Right, so let's get these topped with our icing. So it really doesn't take much icing. I'm just doing a really light drizzle over the top, and that will settle onto the eclair. I find the glazes made with fruit go a little bit thinner. You can obviously thicken it up if you wanted to with more powdered sugar. And then we're going to place those hazelnuts that we made earlier on top. These just look so elegant. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of that raspberry dust over the top, just to really make sure you know it's raspberry in there. Make it nice and pink and pretty. Let's go in for a raspberry. That dust on top is so tart, cuts the sweetness of that filling, which is so creamy and lovely. The eclair is airy and light, delicious. Let's try that salted caramel. These are the editor's favorites, so I'll only have a small bite. If you like salted caramel, this is the eclair for you. It's salty, it's sweet. That salt sort of hits the top of your mouth and the sweetness just fills it up and you've got that creaminess all the way through. It is gorgeous. Thanks for watching Black Cat Kitchen. Make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more notifications when we post new videos on baking, cooking, and cats.